Sunday night. Last Sunday night, I was trying to give you a way to categorize the Proverbs, and now we're going to take those 6 themes that we talked about last week, and we're going to study them over the next however long it takes us. All right, and I anticipate there'll be at least 2 or 3 weeks given to each topic. Certainly, we're going to start with the one that receives the greatest number of verse content. And I've already told you several times that in the book, the theme that is given the greatest amount of verse content is the theme of our words or our speech, wise words. And so this evening, we are going to begin that topic of speech by looking at the 2 major categories of speech in Proverbs. So there are 6 major themes in Proverbs, and among those themes, there are certain emphases. And within the theme of speech, there are 2 main emphases, and those 2 main emphases are going to be our main points for this evening. And very simply, what you're going to find is that according to Proverbs, wise speech is concerned with both quality and quantity. Wise speech is concerned with both quality, that is what is being said, and quantity, that is how much is being said. These are the pervasive themes of speech in Proverbs. And so I did some basic statistical studies regarding how much does the average person speak or say. Okay? And this website called wordsrated.com is a website that is devoted to bettering and the statistics, that's hard to say apparently, around the English language, all right? So this is actually a pretty in-depth study of word usage. It says that the average adult has around 30,000 words in their known vocabulary. The average adult has around 30,000 words in their known vocabulary. How many would say, that seems high for me? Now, it does say that the average, how many of you think that seems low for you? Yeah, Kevin, we know. Kevin knows some words, right? Yes, but it does say that the average individual only uses about 3% of those words in a day. So just because you know them doesn't mean you use a lot. Okay? The average person speaks 16,000. Females at about 16,215. Males speaking slightly less at about 15,699. The average person speaks about 940 words in an hour. Now, okay, this is not intended to draw gender lines, but how many of you feel like that 15,699 for males is a little bit high? Yeah, me too. All right, that's all right. It's according to the website. It's according to the website. I am not talking about how much ladies talk. I'm talking about how little men tend to talk, all right? It's funny. So growing up, and of course we laugh about it now, there's a sense of dark irony. My dad has always been a man of few words, but he's particularly a man of few words now. But he's always been a man of few words. Always. I mean, my dad was the kind of guy, in many ways, I know what I know about biblical wisdom in speech from Proverbs from my dad. My dad's the kind of guy that is probably going to be the last person to share his opinion, but it's probably the first opinion you should ask. You know what I mean? So he's not just going to be the first one to offer. Now, the only other person that I know is naturally, well, maybe naturally, in our family at least, quieter than my dad is my brother. My brother is very quiet. He just doesn't say a lot. And that's his personality, and he's a thinker, and he's very bright that way. And so you can see how growing up, what you know about me, I didn't really fit in with the dudes in my family. How many of you have noticed I have a few things to say? Yeah, right? I'm a preacher, right? And so it's interesting that I was subjected to this kind of dynamic where I either had to learn from people who were naturally better at this than me or just constantly speak over them. And so the Lord actually raised me in an environment where it was good for me to learn quietness from others. So, the average individual speaks about 940 words per hour during a typical day. So in other words, whether we realize it or not, we actually say a lot. Now this website, I'm not going to go into it, but this website goes into then the compounding effect of that over days and months and years and even just in your own head. If you were to take that working number of 16,000 words in a day, you can come up with some pretty significant math for how much you've actually communicated with people in your life. And when we begin to think about the body of our conversation, or think about it holistically, it could either be a very enriching and encouraging thing to do, or it could be a very alarming thing to do. Proverbs is going to assure that as we grow to speak and communicate like we should, this kind of wise communication and guard the door of our lips, it is going to assure that as the math on our language and the words that we use increases, the quality of those words are improved and the quantity may actually decrease. So we're going to look at these two concepts together, quantity of speech and quality of speech. Let's pray together. Father, we thank you so much for the opportunity that we have to study the Word, and I pray that you would give us discipline of mind and heart now. Thank you so much for the truth that you have preserved for us. Cause us to be transformed by it. Make us more like the perfect speaker. And we ask in his name, amen. All right, so if you're taking notes this evening, you might just create two columns, or you can do it in whatever format you want. If it were you, I'm not really a column guy, but if it were me, I would just have my point one, and I would be writing the references. And so maybe that's how you want to do that this evening. You want to have quantity of speech and the references I'm going to give you, because I'm going to give you a lot, and the goal is to get to quality of speech, but I want to make sure that we have we really understand this concept thoroughly. So we are going to deal with every single one of these verses in sequence. I've given them to you in text chronological order as well. So. I don't know how many of you are OCD enough for it to really bother you that the verses are out of order. It would bother me. So I'm giving them to you in order. Quantity of speech. Starting in Proverbs 10, verse 19, when words are many, transgression is not lacking. But whoever restrains his lips is prudent. And so you note there, and this might be one of the more indicative and most plainly stated verses where this concept is most plainly stated, that proportionate to what we say is the possibility of our sin. Did you hear what I said? Proportionate to what we say is the possibility of our sin. And so essentially what Solomon is doing is he's going to use some basic math concepts here, right? Let's just apply some logic. Even outside the idea of spiritual wisdom, just apply common sense. If you're concerned that your words are going to get you in trouble, don't say so many words. Proverbs 12:23, a prudent man conceals knowledge, but the heart of fools proclaims folly. Now, this verse seems counterintuitive, and we're going to interact with a few of these verses that seem counterintuitive. What does it say the prudent man does regarding his knowledge? The wise man or the prudent man, does it say spews his wisdom? It says he conceals his knowledge, but the heart of fools proclaims folly. And so here we actually have the wise man exercising his discernment in not making known what knowledge he apparently has. Now, why is that counterintuitive to us? It's counterintuitive to us because we think of wisdom as something fundamentally that is expressed or shared. You know, I was thinking about this actually yesterday, obviously. So I told you that I was on ordination council, and I'm assuming you're familiar with what those are. Essentially, a bunch of pastors or seminary teachers sit on one side, and the candidate sits on the other, and they review his doctrinal statement, and they make sure his theology is correct, and they ask him ministry-related questions, and it's a really enjoyable process. Not always for the candidate, but it's an important process. And it struck me the first council that I served on, which was probably, 4 or 5 years ago at this point, for a friend of mine, that it hit me in the middle. It was the young guys asking all the questions. That there were multiple older pastors there. And they weren't asking as much until we got later in the council. And they began to ask character-related questions, more than theological-related questions. And so keeping this in mind, I intentionally went yesterday going, all right, just shut up. Like, you don't need to ask the questions. And so I asked fewer questions because there's this recognition that took place that there are those there that have done this longer, and they might actually be concerned with other things than the minutia of the theology. Because, truly, the minutia of theology is something that God is constantly growing us up in, even as pastors. But the more we mature, the more we recognize that validity and consistency of godly character, there's no substitute for that. A prudent man conceals knowledge. Maybe you know somebody, like I just mentioned, like my dad or my grandfather, my mom's dad was this way, that they weren't going to be the first one to share their opinion, but you probably should ask them first. Maybe you know someone, maybe you worked with them on a board or on a work board or a church board or something, and they just sat and they thought and they listened and they asked questions, and then whenever they said something, it was like, well, I guess that's what we're doing. They always had the final word, because it was the right word. But they were waiting until the right time, and they wanted to understand. Proverbs 13:3, whoever guards his mouth preserves his life. He who opens wide his lips comes to ruin. Now, remember, one of the things that we're going to see about Proverbs is this intentionally exaggerated language. And remember that Solomon is working with sons who are going to be kings. They're going to be monarchs. They're going to work with important people. And so he may very well be helping his sons make decisions that could result in their own or somebody else's safety. But certainly we understand the principle that guarding one's speech preserves not just the health of life, but the peace of life. and careless speech leads to destruction. So maybe outside of the physical safety or harm that's here, maybe just think about the relational safety or harm that is sometimes inflicted when we don't preserve our mouth, when we don't guard our mouth. How many times have you detracted from someone's emotional or spiritual life with the words that you said? Or have I? And it caused relational destruction. It caused family pain. Proverbs 17:27, whoever restrains his words has knowledge. Here it is again. Whoever restrains his words has knowledge. It's a sign of godly wisdom. It's a sign of godly knowledge. And he who has a cool, that is tempered, spirit, that's not like the way that we mean cool, like cool dude. That's like tempered. He's a tempered spirit. He's a reserved spirit. He was a cool spirit as a man of understanding. The words are guarded. That word restrained has the idea of fenced in. Like you might put on an animal, restraining that animal. Has knowledge. So the individual who has the ability to keep in what they may feel needs to be said may actually reveal greater wisdom and knowledge than saying what they believe needs to be said. And I'm sure you've seen this played out in your own life, not even just to the detrimental effects, but have you ever had a conversation with someone, maybe someone's come to you for counsel, or they're seeking out, wisdom or advice, and they begin to explain their story to you, and you jump in before, and you actually address the wrong things, when really, maybe that individual just needs to think themselves back into sense. You know what I mean? That someone wants to talk with you, and they just need to say it, and they need to hear themselves say it out loud, and maybe hear how crazy it sounds or how their own thinking is off. But sometimes what we do is we cut it off because we think we have an assessment situation, and we think what we have to say needs to be said, and it's very valuable. And actually what that person may have just needed is a few questions and just some time to think themselves or talk themselves back into sense. Proverbs 17:28 is fascinating. Proverbs 17:28 is really interesting. I want you to go with me there to chapter 17. And I want you to read verse 24 with me. The discerning sets his face towards wisdom, but the eyes of the fool are on the ends of the earth. The discerning sets his face towards wisdom, but the eyes of the fool are on the ends of the earth. So the duration of the fool's life is alluded to in verse 24. And it's not good. Remember, wisdom brings life, foolishness brings death. Look with me now at verse 28. Even a fool who keeps silence is considered wise. Even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. So now even the foolish person, when maybe it's luck, or maybe they're growing, and finally that foolish person at the right moment learns to keep the door of their lips, learns to shut up, learns to not say it, learns to keep it in, rather than just spewing whatever they think is out there. They're just babbling words and words and words and words and words. Even that fool is considered wise when he keeps his lips. When he closes his lips, he is deemed intelligent. Wisdom The wisdom of silence can even make the fool appear wise and express wisdom. I'm going to give you a few more, and then we're going to bring a real-life scenario into this conversation. Actually, no. Let's bring a real-life scenario in now. I want to go a different way in application in chapter 18. So think about your relationship, will you, we're going to apply it to several family relationships. So let's start first of all with your relationship with your spouse. And let's assume that we are past the conflict initiation phase. And some of you are going, okay, I know where we are. Yeah. You're past the conflict initiation phase. You know the conflict initiation phase. It's where it could just be a misunderstanding. It could be something very harmless. Or it might be that, one of you is feeling a little bit hot and one of you is feeling, something didn't go well. A word was said that was maybe misunderstood or taken out of context or something. And neither one of you let love cover. So now you're both in you're past the conflict initiation phase. The conflict initiation phase is usually the time to shut it down. Either both of you or one of you let love cover, and hopefully, the flood doesn't break through the dam. But we're past the conflict initiation phase. Identify in your marriage and be aware if it is you who is the spewer in conflict. You know what I mean when I say that? The one who just starts saying words. The words are just coming. And usually when that happens, that is not only a quantity problem, it is also a quality problem. But the quantity problem does not help. So in the situation of marriage, in a situation of conflict, what should happen is wisdom should be expressed to keep the door of our lips so that we don't get past the conflict initiation phase, but so that we actually shut it down before it even starts. So whatever the issue comes up, so let's work it backwards now. Whatever issue comes up, whatever problem comes up, I'll use a real life one, okay? I'll use a real life one. I think it was year 4 in our marriage before my wife and I stopped having arguments when we traveled. How many of you travel as a family ordeal? Okay, maybe not? All right, just us. That's fine. Yeah, travel, the tensions are already up, right? Because the kids are hungry and they're tired and you've gotten them up early and their car seat's uncomfortable and blah, 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 blah. And usually there's a line of demarcation in our responsibilities. My wife packs the bags because she has a very specific way that it needs done, and I pack the car. They've become conflated. Where lately she's been very interested in packing the car because I guess my packing is insufficient. Right? Now, we can either get offended by that, and we have. Just let me do it. You're slowing us down. You do your thing, I'll do my thing. It's more efficient. And now I've got all the reasons why what we're doing is inefficient, and I'm spewing why this is not the best way, and blah, 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 blah. Some of you are grinning like, this sounds familiar. So how do we avoid that? The way that we avoid that is in the early phases, before we get to that phase, just going, okay, this isn't going to be a thing. How can I help you? We're choosing our words. We're not spewing our words. in your relationship with your kids. Correction will be more likely to go poorly if you speak out of the moment of frustration rather than collecting yourself so that you can choose your words. I had a man disciple me once in my parenting, and he just said this, and it sticks in my head: your response time is not helping you. Your response time is not helping you. That was his way of saying, just slow down, dude. Give yourself a second. Just breathe. And it's not like I was shouting at them. It's just like correcting, rather than just slowing down, giving everybody a chance. Maybe my kid's going to work this out. That happens sometimes. If you just give them a minute, slow down. Choose our words rather than spew our words. In your relationships with people at church or at work, whatever is frustrating you, are words chosen or are they spewed? Remember how all of this was framed, and I use this verse as almost the thesis on purpose. When words are many, transgression is not lacking. Now, regarding speaking before understanding, that is, the quantity of our words exceeds our understanding of the topic. The quantity of our words exceeds our understanding of the topic. Or, to use our vernacular, we don't know what we're talking about, but we talk about it anyway. Proverbs 18:2. This is the ESV's translation. It's a great translation. I've done work on this verse. It's a great translation. A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion. Did you hear that? A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion. Proverbs 18:2. Now, here's the thing. You may have a very good opinion of something. You may have a great opinion that is worth sharing. But have you rightly and fully understood the situation into which you are speaking before forming an assessment about it? I think most mischaracterizations of a person, or I'm just going to call them judgments of a person, that we make are probably just a result of not seeking to understand that individual. What makes them tick? Why do they think the way that they do? Why do they view the world the way that they do? And sometimes it's really simple. Sometimes it's silly stuff. And we make these judgments, and you go, Kyle, that's just, it's not important. It's okay. It's not a big deal. And then other times, we actually make sinful judgments because we've not understood. I had a silly one today. So we visited a church, the church that's commissioning my father-in-law, a church in Noblesville, Indiana. And something I'd never seen before in a church happened. One of the musicians gets up on the stage and has a Doberman with her, a dog, and it goes up on the stage with her and lays down next to her. It was apparently an emotional support Doberman. Now, I had a lot of questions. It's like, I've been in a lot of churches. I have never seen this before. This is incredible. What's going on, right? But it's not that big a deal. But I'm immediately making judgments about why this is weird and my experiences, and it's just not a big deal. Now, that can very easily tip into sin when I begin to make character judgments about someone that fortunately, I didn't do that this morning. But how many times do we do that? We take something that's so simple and we have a seed thought, and then we start to assume things that are really wrong just because we haven't taken time to understand. Have you ever gotten upset about something that you didn't actually ask questions about? How many of you have done it? I have. And you had your mind fully made up about the situation, about this thing that bothered you, about this person, about the scenario, about whatever, but you didn't ask questions about it. A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion. Pertaining to this idea, in the same chapter, Proverbs 18:13, if one gives an answer before he hears it, it is folly and shame. If one gives an answer before he hears it, it is folly and shame. In your parenting, do you ask questions before you discipline? In your marriage, do you truly seek to understand? And when I say understand, I mean, are you actually intending to understand that individual, that person, your spouse? Or are you just immediately beginning to break down their arguments in your head? Let me ask you a question. When you successfully win an argument with somebody, what have you won? If you successfully win an argument with somebody, what have you won? I would suggest you haven't really won anything. And the damage that could be done there is probably greater than anything that you think you've won, or I think that I've won. So next time that information comes in that you're immediately making judgments about, or that person makes a decision or does something that you do not understand, it is sin and folly to form opinions about it, or it is shame and folly to form an entire view about it without rightfully approaching that person or seeking to understand or asking questions beyond the way that you view it. And great damage could be done. Great damage could be done. Churches have turned upside down because people had a thought about what was perceived or what was said and just didn't ask the right questions. Families have been turned upside down because understanding was secondary to expressing opinion. Proverbs 19:2, desire without knowledge is not good, and whoever makes haste with his feet misses his way. Now, this may not sound like a verbal sin, but the idea of makes haste with his feet is that they're finding somebody, they're finding people to agree, or they're finding people that will be with them. Makes haste with their feet. They're going a certain direction. Hasty actions and speech without understanding lead to failure. Proverbs 20, verse 19, whoever goes about slandering reveals secrets. Do not associate with here's the word, babbler. Proverbs 20:19, whoever goes about slandering reveals secrets. Therefore, do not associate with a simple babbler. Goes about. That's coupled with the idea of making haste with the feet, just finding the right person to hear the right thing so that they can share whatever they want to share. There is something deeply diabolical. And it's actually that word, diabolos, the word slander in the New Testament. I don't know if you know that. But there's something deeply diabolical about not just one person who doesn't understand or they haven't sought to understand, but then they gather unto themselves people who do not understand. And now they're leading in a culture of lacking and just ignorance. They're leading people in a culture of ignorance and helping people make the wrong assumptions and the wrong conclusions. And now This foolishness of people sharing information without actual understanding has compounded and multiplied to the point where its effect could be devastating. Could be devastating. Speak evil of no one. Inventory your thoughts and your word. Inventory your words over the last week. Who have you easily and characteristically criticized? Who have you easily and characteristically criticized? Is there somebody that your family enjoys hating on, being critical of, finding mistakes in, keeping under the microscope? Foolish babble, constant sound. We're not going to get to the quality of speech tonight. I'll share 2 verses with you and we'll be done. I figured that would probably happen. Proverbs 21:23. Whoever keeps his mouth and his tongue keeps himself out of trouble. Whoever keeps his mouth and his tongue keeps himself out of trouble. So, here, similar to the idea of where we started, that when words are many, transgression is not lacking. This word keep literally has the idea of, it's the same word for the noun a keep, but it's in the verb form. This word means to guard, it means to fortress, it means to keep refuge in. So literally when we fortify our mouth and hold our tongue, it keeps us out of trouble. We don't produce trouble or ourselves for others. Now let's conclude with Proverbs 29. And if you will go with me there. Proverbs 29. Look at verse 9. I just want to do something similar to what we just did in chapter 17. If a wise man has an argument with a fool, the fool only rages and laughs, and there is no quiet. Look with me at verse 23. One's pride will bring him low. Remember, in Proverbs, foolishness and pride go together. Look with me at verse 27, an unjust man, and the unjust man in Proverbs is often the fool, is an abomination to the righteous. So again, we're seeing a case being made for the darkness of the life of a fool. We're seeing how unfortunate or disdainful the life of a fool is. Now look with me at verse 20. Do you see a man who is hasty in his words? There is more hope for a fool than him. Do you see a man who is hasty, uncontrolled, uses it quickly? There is more hope for a fool. Now, just based on the few verses we read from 29, and based on how we've studied Proverbs up until this point, you tell me, does a fool have very much hope? No. That's one of the things we're supposed to understand. You go the way of the fool, you don't have a lot of hope. But do you see a man who's hasty, careless, reckless with his words? There's more hope for a fool than him. What kind of care do you take with your words? And just to conclude, flip over with me to the New Testament, the book of James. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this terminology, but it has been said that James is the New Testament book of Proverbs because it maintains biblical wisdom. Now, there are also questions about the authorship of the book of James. The majority view is that this is the half-brother of Jesus Christ, and I tend to agree with that. But certainly, we see here this main theme of Proverbs finding its way into the New Testament wisdom book. And perhaps you know chapter 3 well. Look with me, starting in verse 1. Not many of you should become teachers, brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with stricter judgment. So immediately, at least within the application of teaching, the idea of the tongue's content should be greatly controlled, for we all stumble in many ways, and if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able to bridle his whole body. So the lesson here is if you can keep your tongue, you can probably control everything else. So it's an impactful statement. If we put bits in the mouths of horses that they may obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. And now you'll see that the writer is going to increase the size of the thing being controlled. He starts with us. And then he moves to a horse, a little tiny bit, controlling the entire horse. And then he's going to move to a ship. Look to the ships also, that they are so large and driven by strong winds, they're guided by a very small rudder, something small controlling something very large. So also the tongue is a little member, but boasts great things. In other words, has great potential. Something small that controls things very large. For a great forest is set ablaze by such a small fire, and the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among the members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird and reptile of sea creature can be tamed, but the tongue can no man tame. No human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our Lord and Father, and we curse people who are made in His likeness, who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth comes blessing and cursing. My brothers, these things ought not be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and salt water? Can a fig, my brothers, bear olives, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can salt pond yield fresh water. And I just have to wonder if James, the half-brother of Jesus, heard him say, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so what does wisdom call us back to remember? Not only the magnitude and the potency of the tongue, the magnitude and the potency of the tongue, but that it is a revealer of our deepest beliefs and our truest person. It's a revealer of our deepest beliefs and our truest person. So how much we say may reflect the quantity of our godliness, the authenticity of our godliness. Wise speech is concerned with the quantity of what is said. Maybe you should count your speech tomorrow. Now, I started by way of conclusion, I started with a dark joke. But you all are aware of the journey the Lord has led my family on regarding my dad's degenerative vocal cords. And it's been a unique trial. But something happened a few years ago that I've never forgotten and that I often think about. So there was a time where one of Dad's doctors believed that he could get an injection into his vocal cords that would give him some voice a day, and that his vocal cords would need to rest and reset for the next day. And the doctor told him, I can't imagine you'll have much more than 15 minutes of voice a day. And I remember him saying, or typing, talking about choosing your words. And I thought, maybe I should think that carefully about my words too. If I had to count every single one and choose whether they were worthwhile enough to be spent for the day, what would I say? Or would you? Would it be only that which is good for building up? Gracious speech, seasoned with salt, speaking evil of no one, revealing an abundance of authentic love for Christ and others. Wise speech is concerned with quantity. Would you pray with me?